Donald Trump is racking up wins and losses this week. On the top side, we have a new Ukraine ceasefire deal coming down. It's been agreed to by Ukraine and Russia, or Ukraine and America, and we'll see if we can get Russia on board. But he's way down this week from attacking the best congressman in Congress, Thomas Massie. He has a tariff-induced stock market crash and a potential looming recession. And speaking of tariffs, he pissed off the Canadians so bad, they're voting liberal now. And he's deporting pro-Palestine protesters. Also, Syria has a nice little ethnic cleansing going on, so we're going to talk about that.
Boy, it's been quite a week.
Yeah, it was a heavy news week. Yeah, so we're gonna go into stuff. We're gonna get depth, but we're gonna do it quickly because we got a lot of stories to cover in our normal time. Could you hit our clock, actually?
Absolutely, I will. And while I do, I want to encourage everyone watching on YouTube to please hit that like button. And, of course, don't forget to hit the notification bell so you make sure you get all of our notifications for new episodes that come out weekly. And if you're on Spotify, we have a special request for our Spotify listeners. We have way more listeners on Spotify than we have reviews. Please take a couple seconds, just give us 5 stars on Spotify. It would mean a lot to us. Same if you're on any other podcast platform, Apple, etc. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that.
Hell, I'll settle for a 4-star review if you just fucking did it. I shouldn't have said that.
I'll pay you $5 for a 4-star review.
And before we get started, we got the meme of the show. Really encapsulates the week. We got Donald Trump doing the who's the guy that the meme is usually on? It's
David.
David. I'm forgetting the rapper's name.
You got this.
Hotline Bling. It's from Hotline Bling. It's
Drake.
Drake. There we go. God, yeah.
We cover culture on this show.
I know. Well, it's late and I'm a sleepy boy. It's denying arrest pedophiles on Epstein list, but endorsing arrest campus students for anti-Semitism.
Been a really interesting swing for the administration. I feel like the libertarians were really high on like the first 20 to 30 days, and things have gone a little south.
Yeah, and that's something we could do a whole episode on, just the bullshittery in there. Like, all of a sudden, libertarians that endorse Trump this time have to now own that he's doing things we disagree with on things, or the same thing with the MAGA people, right?
Yeah.
And it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, individuals have their own beliefs, and we can disagree with the president while think he's a net good or not.
Absolutely, but that is a foreign concept to a lot of people who are the real government bootlickers who are ironically calling libertarians bootlickers. I'm like, you guys, you just can't win. Anyway,
100%.
Let's get into it.
So first up, Ukraine ceasefire. So the U.S. To restore military support to Ukraine after it agrees to ceasefire. So the background, remember the big blow up? Well, that's the background there, right? I mean, there's this tit for tat happening in the media between individual meetings with Marco Rubio and Zelensky, where he's saying in the meeting with Marco Rubio, yeah, I just need to pass it by Congress, my legislature. And then he goes to the media and be like, I didn't agree to nothing. It's a bunch of bullshit. And then Zelensky brings it up in front of the media in the Oval Office, and it of course explodes into what everyone has now seen. I mean, it's an incredibly huge watch video. It's been everywhere.
It is, and we had an awesome episode with Scott Horton, the Scott Horton, on that very topic, where he got to react as if he were in the room in the Oval Office during that press conference. It was a great episode. Definitely go back and watch that. It's just a couple episodes ago.
It blew up on X too.
It did great on X.
Did great on X. So this was agreed in Saudi Arabia. It was an 8-hour-long meeting at the same time, or actually the day before. So calculating for the circumference of the Earth.
Assuming you believe the Earth is round, of course.
Yeah. Ukraine launched the largest drone attack it's ever launched before, 300 drones.
Wow.
And Moscow authorities have said the attack led to at least 1 death and injured 14 people. So 300 drones, that was the best they could do to try to put the pain on them in the 11th hour before they agreed to the ceasefire. Now, fighting still happened until Russia agrees to the ceasefire, but an interesting kind of timeline there.
Yeah.
So after that happened, after the whole blow up in the Oval Office happens, then Trump withdraws military aid as well as intelligence aid, which is interesting, right? And then, maybe that's why this attack was so ineffective. Not as good at intelligence.
Just shooting in the dark sort of thing.
Yeah, just shooting them towards Moscow, see what you can hit.
Yeah.
And but now that's all back on back on and going in order to, of course, put the pressure back on Russia, saying, okay, America's back in the fight now on behalf of Ukraine until you agree to get to the ceasefire. So sensible incentives for bringing in Russia to the table.
Are there any whispers yet of if and when Russia will accept their side of this ceasefire deal?
Yeah, I mean, as far as for a ceasefire, I don't see a downside for Russia in stopping. Right? I mean, the lines won't move. They already gained the territory they have. Even like the Kursk offensives, for example, they've pretty much regained the lion's share of that back. So why not? Especially given that the signaling has been pretty strong that we just don't care who controls Donetsk. We just don't.
Yeah.
So like at the end of the day, are we going to spend more blood, money, and treasure on this? I think the Russians would like it over as well. So I don't see why they wouldn't. But we'll see. I mean, there's been a lot of predictions on both sides. It's a wait and see sort of moment.
For sure.
Yep.
So if this does happen, when this does happen, hopefully, this will be a W for libertarians, for all of us calling
big W for the administration. I mean, like this was the biggest reason why. Because I'm no Donald Trump fanboy, I like him when he does good things, and I just like him when he does bad things, like anybody else, right?
Yeah.
And but at least for me, the moment he was able to articulate one time that he kind of understood Ukraine expansion or NATO expansion as a core cause of the war, I was like, well, why not? I'm gonna be more friendly to this guy.
Sure.
Like he seems he grasps the causes, even if he's not willing to adjudicate the causes, and he's willing to get a mineral deal out of it and all that stuff. But that's a real part of it. I mean, if he can get that, that's a huge win for him. And he could end a ceasefire in Gaza. Kind of got that. I mean, there's been fighting on both sides since the ceasefire, and they're supposed to in Gaza. I know we're switching topics, but in Gaza, this is the juncture in which they should have entered phase 2, where Israel's supposed to pull out, and there's supposed to be another range of exchange of prisoners. But that's kind of gotten hung up in the process.
And why is that?
I haven't done enough on it yet to really understand exactly what it is. Obviously, Israel, I mean, they've also are now taking large swaths of Syria, and they have a disincentive to pull out. At this point, they're really just hitting without being hit at this point.
Yeah. So, have they taken more territory in Syria since the buffer zone that they claimed during the fall of the Assad regime?
No, it's all that area.
It's that. Okay.
Yeah, and they're still occupying it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
All right. So the other story we got today, and I apologize, I want to go deeper, but we got so many stories to cover, so we're just going to hit the big points here and dive deep where we can. We have this spat between Donald Trump and Thomas Massie. This has gotten pretty big, so I don't think I'll have to read it. But in short, Donald Trump's is pissed off at Thomas Massie. Calls him a grandstander, calls for his primary, and basically says he voted. He's an automatic no on just about everything, despite the fact that he has always voted for continuing resolutions in the past.
Always.
That's bullshit. They found one that he voted for, and it didn't even pass. And he compares him to Liz Cheney. This is also another beef that I have with this particular Truth social post, full of untruths. Yeah. So it's a heck of it feels very much like that moment, and people have been bringing this up a lot around COVID when Massie forced an actual vote on COVID relief. Yeah, it's kind of like that again. And and if you don't remember, a CR is a continuing resolution. It basically says whatever the current funding is, just extend it forward. Right? It has a couple cuts to it, a little bit of cuts to it, but it's not even close to the scale of the challenge. It's not even close to the scale of challenge of all the spending problems that DOGE has already highlighted. Right? So we're not cutting USAID budget. We're just going to keep all the money there, but we're going to end the programs. So what the fuck happens? Sorry, I'm cussing a lot today.
That's all right.
What happens to the money?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Well, that is a great question because, I mean, the American people were told just about a week or two ago that Elon was going to pay us all $5,000 dividends from the DOGE savings. So if the government's keeping it, is it earmarked for taxpayer dividends?
Yeah. No, that's not in it either. We're not even going to get $5,000 each, guys.
It's just in the slush fund.
Yep, just in the slush fund.
That's
so we got this video from Thomas Massie, kind of with his thoughts on the CR that I thought was interesting.
Hi, Congressman Massie here. I thought you'd like to know about the fake fight that's going on in the House of Representatives right now over this CR. They're trying to pitch it as a conservative CR versus liberal Democrats. And even the Democrats are going along in the House. But let me tell you why that's a fake fight. They plan to pass it with all Republicans here in the House. But after we leave town, the Democrats are going to vote for it in the Senate. That's right. They're going to need about 8 Democrat senators to vote for this thing over in the Senate. That means that this deal has already been cut, that Mike Johnson has cut a deal with the Senate Democrats, Senate leadership, and even Hakeem Jeffries. He's in on this so that they can pitch their fake fight here in the House. Now, why am I so certain this is going to pass in the Senate when it gets over there with 8 Democrats or however many Democrats they need? Well, Mike Johnson is sending us home a day early. We're going to vote on this thing and skip town. If you thought there was really a threat of them not passing it in the Senate, why would you leave town? The other thing that's going on is the Democrats have a retreat, an off-site retreat, where they're going to get together and party and have, guest speakers and stuff. And that starts tomorrow and runs through Thursday and Friday. Now, you think they're not going to let this thing pass? What would happen if, let's say, the Freedom Caucus decided to take the conservative stance on this CR and oppose it? Well, they would be about 30 or 40 votes short here in the House, the Republicans would. But Hakeem Jeffries wouldn't be able to pretend, along with Mike Johnson, in this fake fight, that this is a conservative versus liberal battle in the House, and he would just hand over at least 40 Democrats. And once you get to 40 Democrats, it'd probably be a whole lot more Democrats. So that's what's going on. It's all a fake fight. You're going to find this out when it goes over to the Senate, and you have Democrats in the Senate voting for it. Now,
Yeah. So big fake fight. It's not a real thing. It's not what, he also claims that it's not what, Trump and the Republicans ran on the election cycle. It's not taking seriously all the scandal we found with Doge. It's not doing the thing that we said we were going to do. And we should do the thing we said we were going to do.
So the argument from the Trump administration, at least that I've seen in my, I would say, whatever, that I've seen on X, is that this is buying the federal government more time to execute their plan, right? Is this like a raising the debt limit? What exactly is this continuing resolution doing that's buying the administration more time, if that is in fact the case?
Yeah, so the steel man of the opposite side is you do the continuing resolution so you don't have a government shutdown, you don't have the media scandal of it, and then you go through the actual budget appropriations process where you pass 12 bills, goes through a final bill vote, gets basically brought together and then passed the House and then on to the Senate, yada, yada, yada. And Thomas has actually been I think very accommodating. He said, we should just tackle this USAID stuff. We should just cut something substantial more than that, or even better, even if we don't want to get into the nitty gritty of USAID because we won't get the Democrats in the Senate, just pass rescission authority.
With what?
Rescission authority. So basically that says that the president can send back money that he's not using on these programs. Do it narrowly, right? Because you want Congress to keep the power of the purse. That's the incentive that it's the only power Congress has anymore, even though they don't use it. Therefore, narrow rescission authority just on USAID.
That would be enough to get him to vote for it?
Well, yeah, that's what he said.
Interesting.
That was a different tweet, but yeah, it's a crazy moment because this is Washington politics as usual with minimal cuts to not tackle any of the major issues. Keep in mind, the interest on the debt payment is now $1 trillion. As Scott mentioned, $885 billion for defense and $1 trillion on interest payments on the debt annually, right? And we're not doing that. It's a $2 trillion budget deficit. That's the official number, right? And it's clocking up right here on the U.S. debt clock. So just and think about it for a minute. I mean, Doge, according to this, is that it's at a current savings of $190 billion if they just did the things that Doge is recommending, and Congress is the only ones who can. One of the things that frustrates me is all the arguments like, well, he's the leader of the party now. Well, he's the leader of the party that hired this team to go through and say where all the bullshit is and to cut it, and then the Republican Congress isn't backing him up. Right?
Is this surprising? Is this surprising that the Republican Congress isn't backing him up?
Well, it is. Okay. So the real question is how worried are you about a government shutdown? Right? If from day one, January, when they all got in and actually got their butts in seats, in January, if they had been working with we're going to pass the CR, it's going to include all the Doge cuts right off the bat, and then force the Democrats to do something about it in the Senate side to either vote for it or not, that would have been an actual like conservative plan that would back the president in what the Doge team is doing.
And it would put the government shutdown potential on the Democrats for not signing the budget.
Yes, but with their experience, and this is the steel man of it, right? Their experience is that anytime that happens, the media just goes along and blames Republicans, and therefore that happens. Now, the question is, are we in a different media landscape now?
I would say so.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have the corporate press just doesn't have the power they used to, right?
Yeah.
So what are people going to see? They're going to see Doge showing that we're spending money on gay pride parades in Ireland, and they're like, well, this cuts that. Well, why wouldn't we pass that? Maybe that's what it looks like. I don't know. It's risk tolerance. It's a risk tolerance question.
Yeah.
I am very risk tolerant when it comes to this stuff. I think government shutdowns are just fine in themselves, to the degree that it's a leverage to actually get the party that loves government to actually do something if they don't have the media air cover.
Well, and what would we see with a government shutdown that we kind of aren't already seeing with some of these mass firings? I mean, like Forest Service employees laid off, like, the trash cans not getting emptied at our national parks, or the IRS, heaven forbid, not going into the office and doing their jobs.
Yeah.
And anyways, I know that there's a lot more to it than that. But still, to me, it's just kind of, it's a little crazy that all these Republicans campaign so strongly alongside Donald Trump and this agenda, the Doge agenda, and they're still supporting it.
Yeah.
But they're not actually putting their money where their mouth is.
Oh, for sure. And the conservatives have been owning it. They've been
saying our money where their mouth is.
The conservatives have been owning it. They've been saying, Doge is great. They've been backing the president's play on that and doing that in the media and taking credit for, Republicans are taking credit for this as their great idea and then not passing the CR for it. Yeah. Sagar from Breaking Points had a really great question in the press conference today. He was in the influencer seat.
Nice.
The infamous influencer seat, which is very awkwardly positioned. It is not. It definitely looks like an intern seat. You know what I mean?
He does look a bit like an intern too, though. To be fair,
he's just young looking. He's older than he looks. He's just youthful. All right,
I think it's the glasses.
Came out today in a primary challenge against Congressman Thomas Massie. Congressman Massie's been a supporter of Doge. He's been a supporter of Make America Healthy Again. What kind of message is this White House sending against a congressman who's sticking up for principles that he's long held in the chamber and voting against continuing resolution and spending?
I think the president has made it very clear that he believes it's critical for conservatives and Republicans and frankly all members of Congress to get behind this continuing resolution to keep the government funded. The president wants to continue the momentum that he has built over the last 51 days. In order to keep the government funded, we got to keep moving with these deportations, and he believes that everybody needs to get on board with this bill. He's been active in this process. He's been making calls to get this over the finish line, and we're urging every Republican and Democrats too to do what's right for the American public to prevent a government shutdown.
Came out today in a primary challenge against Congressman Thomas.
That's just so contradictory.
What a word salad, nothing
What
answer.
momentum are you trying to continue? The momentum has been the other way.
Yeah, right. This is anti-momentum.
Yeah.
You have now set up where all the MAGA people would say, do I want to go with Thomas Massie or my boy Trump? At that point. And for the libertarians, we're like, easy question.
For sure.
But for the base, the people who show up to the rallies, who if they have an IQ above room temperature, they're going to be like, well, I mean, he's kind of the one doing the real thing here.
Yeah. He's representing the thing we signed up for with this whole campaign.
Yeah,
the whole
right.
MAGA thing.
Right. If they look past the talking points and the true social BS, like he's voted for every CR and stuff like that, and I have seen those, but they get ratioed every time on X, right?
Oh, for sure.
Who knows where they're at on Facebook?
X is a microcosm.
Yeah.
We have to remember and especially ours is probably more of a libertarian echo chamber.
Dude, I went out of my way. I could not find a singular, other than a cat turd, couldn't find a singular actual large account on X arguing otherwise.
Really?
And trying to get out of the algorithmic bias and try to find that, and I could not. Wow. Right? All the big ones are either not talking about it at all and avoiding the topic strategically, which is cowardly. Don't do that.
For sure.
Right? We have every incentive not to cover, this story or the other stories that we're going to cover today. That's an L for Trump. I'm sure it's better for keeping and finding audiences just to be licking the guy's butthole all the time. But that's not at all like actual what we're doing here. That's not our mission. And if that's their mission, you should really distrust those people.
For sure. So how do you think this is going to shake out?
Oh man. I think Massie's correct. I think the congressional schedule tells you a lot about what they're going to do, and that the Democrats are willing to accept this, and they'll vote for it. They only need one vote to cover for Massie right now. I mean, it's a tight Congress again, right? Only 2 votes because we have 3. Right? What was it? Yeah, 3 Republican resignations, like Matt Gaetz, for example, and other people who got moved into the administration to fulfill. So it's only a 2-vote margin right now.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that there is a strategy to this from the Trump campaign beyond just the continuing momentum rhetoric? Something around the idea that, okay, they need to appease the congressional Democrats just enough for 2 years to get stuff done, to continue to be able to like execute on their plan to some extent, hoping that in the midterms, if they're able to do more of what they've promised on the campaign trail, that there will be an even greater Republican majority after the midterms?
Yeah, that assumes that the trade war doesn't tank everything, right? I mean, that assumes that, Trump's momentum continues. And what he did actually probably did the opposite. I mean, Speaker Johnson, like Newt Gingrich's relationship to Ron Paul, was always with the assumption that he's not going to vote for this stuff. So you just make an exception. You don't put the caucus pressure on him on that stuff.
Right.
He's going to be good on pro-life and the other things. But he's not going to vote for that shit.
Yeah. And that's what I would have expected. I mean, I guess I'm not surprised that Trump has made this sort of like a personal battle and talks about primarying him out, in Kentucky. But to me, well, I don't know. I guess a question that I have is the American public braced for the fact that a trade war might have some short-term pain? And I've heard a lot more of that from people who I know who aren't political nerds like us, who might see the fact that is an incoming reality, of a trade war, have some comfortability with that topic, saying, I'm willing to put up with that, understanding that there could be brighter days on the horizon. Maybe a reduction in the income tax, maybe, growth for the domestic economy at the expense of, other countries potentially. Of course, that's going to be a consumption tax on all of us to some extent, for sure. But I'm wondering if the public is willing to put up with that, and if a recession might hurt but not like cripple the U.S. economy or cripple the momentum of the administration as well.
Right. So it depends on the scale and the actual impact and the downstream of impacts of what that will look like, right? So another thing that happened this week, huge stock market sell-off, one of the largest since like 2008. It looks like the dot-com bubble kind of level. But we don't remember the dot-com bubble as like the most disastrous thing, while, the actual housing market recession of 2007, 2008 was very painful for a lot of regular folks, working class people.
Yeah.
So the question is, what are the causes? And are those Trump causes, and will people tolerate them? So I got this clip from CBS, but I really want to know. I think a big thing of this, like you brought up, is the trade-offs on tariffs and income tax and what that looks like, and has that going to actually benefit the regular people, and how that actually trades out. And can you do that? Can you raise enough money from tariffs to actually cover this, so that you're not just piling into the national debt, which is a huge problem that is being left behind, unsurprisingly, from Trump, who did not give any cares at all. I'm trying over here to about the national debt last time he was around. Like, he didn't do nothing on spending.
Yeah.
At least he's trying with Doge this time. So you got to give him props. But also, if he's not doing the CR process, he's not actually cutting the budget. So, or an actual budget process, rather. So anyways, from CBS News on this stuff, I think this analysis was pretty interesting on at least how Wall Street is seeing this stock sell-off and how they're looking at it.
Yeah. It was a big sell-off. It's always scary when these sell-offs occur. 2%, 2.5% for the large stocks, 4% for the NASDAQ. That was the worst day this year. It's actually the worst single day since September. The NASDAQ, the big conglomeration of all these technology companies, that actually has seen a correction, down by more than 10%, actually down 13.5% from its high at the end of last year. But where we are is essentially that the world of investing is made up of human beings. Breaking news. And those human beings are feeling a little freaked out by the on-again, off-again tariffs, retaliations, cuts at the government, and it is making people feel concerned enough that we could see the economy slow down.
So we should point out to our viewers, and you and I have talked about this, that the stock market is not necessarily the economy. But as you know, if there's optimism and enthusiasm and stocks are going up, then people feel good. It's a sentiment that abounds not just with investors, but with businesses as well. In contrast, when we see a bear market or when we see a downturn in the market, people get pessimistic. We've started to see, for example, retail stocks that are not doing so well. They're missing their targets, Walmart, Target, because they're doing business. Most of their stuff is made in China, right? So if this turns out to be a correction, what does that portend for the economy and GDP?
Okay, so you're right. Two different things, right? What is the economy? When we say big picture, all we're talking about is the government tallies up all the goods and services that are sold. And we get a number, and that's the gross domestic product. And when the number goes up from year to year, that's an expansion and a growing economy. And if it shrinks, that's a recession. That's bad. Now, the reality is when you think about like where we are with the stock market and the economy, you're right that usually stocks would rise in a growing economy, right? Because you sort of get the wind at your sails and people are feeling good. They have jobs, they're getting wage increases, they spend money, companies make money. But there have been times where the two diverge. In fact, it happened recently. In 2022, we had the U.S. economy grew by about 2%. The stock market got hammered. It was down 20% that year. And so a lot of what we're talking about when we talk about the stock market, the economy, they are separate. They can lead to feed on one another. And what I think you're talking about is that when people feel good about the stock market and it goes up, we have something called the wealth effect. Hey, my 401k is going up. I have a job. I feel good. That's awesome, right? And maybe I'll spend a little bit more. But
yeah, so the question is are we going to see the downstream effects of that, right? Of that wealth effect question, of that sense of consumer confidence and things like that, that would then lend people to the general impression that everything's going okay. If Trump is going out and doing what Biden did and saying, I know everything looks terrible, everyone's saying it looks terrible, but it's actually really great, that's a really hard claim for people to do if they are facing inflation and not the best job market, and on top of that, their retail expenses are increasing.
True, very true. I guess I wonder how much everyday people, other than the 401ks that she mentioned, are affected by the volatility of the stock market. Yeah, right. I mean the people in my age cohort and below are not heavily invested in the stock market. They're not on fixed income thinking about, did my portfolio go up or down this month or this year? They're more worried about inflation. They're more worried about, like you said, the job market, which for a lot of people, I think they're feeling the flood of the migrant crisis, putting pressure on the number of available jobs and things of that nature. Upward pressure on housing prices, like things that are really tangible in everyday life to people who aren't asset holders predominantly. So I guess where I'm questioning is the average person going to, are we going to see the downstream effects of this wealth effect that she refers to? And are people going to be willing to put up with that because they see better things coming down the road?
And that's the question. And that's not how consumer confidence really fires off, right? I mean, consumer confidence is much more, how do I feel right now? It's a animal spirits type measure. And what she's right about is that, GDP is a misleading figure. It's like a figure that also includes government spending in its calculus of total consumption, which is a very bad measure, if you ask me. Yeah. And Keynes was wrong.
Completely.
Right. And don't get me wrong. At the end of the day, it always comes back to monetary policy and how we leverage debt as the only way to grow the economy. And therefore, it's not by savings. It's not by increase in production, which would be a much more modestly grown economy. But we also wouldn't have these giant busts. So are we paying? Is this Donald Trump's tariffs? That's what people are signaling to when they're talking about stocks. But if the general economy busts in a major way, we see increased unemployment and we see a pullback on production, well, I mean, perhaps it's because we were in a debt-fueled bubble from COVID that just never really had its chance to have its cycle.
Probably from 2008, really.
Yeah. So we've been on the alcohol dramatically since COVID, even worse. I mean, empty money supply just goes absolutely vertical at that time. And that's why inflation's been so bad. And that was done under Trump 1. And now Trump 2 might actually have to pay some of the cost.
Yeah.
And they were able to keep the party going. You know, it's like, think about it like you had a party and you got super drunk and then woke up the next morning and you just kept drinking.
Yep.
Right. And now it's that third day now and you're actually going to pay the cost. Are you going to pay the cost? I mean, that's the trick. The left is eating this up, right? They're just taking advantage of this opportunity. This is Donald Trump's. Everything's Donald Trump's fault. And there's a sense in which that's true, but it's also a sense in which we never paid the cost during the Biden administration either that should have been paid. Interest rates are crappy right now for a lot of people, but they probably should have been higher.
Yeah.
It might have been more like Volcker level, like late Carter, early Reagan level interest rates to absorb all of that new money in the system and cool things off so that you wouldn't have to pay it longer. A recession could be a good thing. The same way that hangover is not good feeling, but it's actually better because now you're not poisoning yourself. You're actually detoxing at the moment.
Right. Some have pointed to this potentially being a battle between Trump and Jay Powell, chairman of the Fed, who, you know, obviously dictates interest rates to cool off the market, to get Jerome Powell to bring interest rates down as if we are in a recession, whether or not we actually are or say we are or whatever, however the media decides to spin it.
Yeah.
That would make it easier for the U.S., you know, to pay its debt service, you know, our $1 trillion in debt service every year on the national debt. So have you seen anything about that? Do you think that that's like a valid analysis of the situation? Right now?
But I think economically speaking, that's just saying, well, now let's do a bump and keep going. You know, like that's the problem, right? And then we're just stuck in the fiat cycle. Now, I'm not saying that therefore there's no legitimate way out that, you know, could have some downstream effects that are positive, you know, like less interest rates. That's going to help a lot of people in a debt-fueled economy. But that fails to answer the core question, which is
of course it does. Yeah.
How to have. He wants to rework all of American manufacturing, you know, by new tax rules and by tariffs and all this stuff. But he's unwilling to touch the actual driver of a lot of the actual problem, which is the Fed.
Well, and we've talked about how he fails to recognize monetary policy as the root cause of inflation for his entire campaign.
Yeah, right.
So, like, obviously, this is nothing new. We're not surprised that he's not acknowledging that, right?
I'm setting it up for saying this is not going to solve it.
Oh, 100%.
This is and until they address that, we're going to be playing the same stupid game, and you know that it's ultimately appeal to like it's not going to solve it long term
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, it just speaks to the wisdom, I guess, of people who are looking at this and going, okay, I need to be in inflation hedged assets if I can be, right?
Yeah.
Precious metals have had a killer rally this year. Obviously, they're down a little bit because when there's a massive sell-off, a lot of people will sell off other, you know, investments and reserves, even within like precious metals. But historically speaking, you know, it's been a very stable and good investment. And I saw an interesting stat. I think I've maybe mentioned this before on the show that in like the early 1900s, 10 gold bars would buy the average priced home. It's about $4,000 to $7,000 depending on where you get your numbers. Today, 10 gold bars will buy the average price home, which is, you know, somewhere in the $500,000 to $700,000 range. So if you're looking at it in terms of, you know, a monetary unit not denominated in dollars, you know, that's pretty fair.
All of a sudden, yeah. So we also have Tesla was one of the features of this that got a lot of coverage is that there's a Tesla sell-off about 15%. And the CBS thing we just watched is a little bit old too already in terms of the stock market. I mean, it's gotten worse since then. And the Tesla sell-off has gotten worse. But we have a bunch of stuff happening with this. And I wonder to what degree the dominant cause this year. I just don't know. I'm just speculating. But we have, for example, there's ex-DDoS attack, supposedly stemming from Ukraine. Multiple vandalism reports from Tesla factories, like firebombing Tesla factories, like crazy, like real violent stuff, and cars, like people, just like regular people driving a Tesla and they find the wrong progressive and they mess it up. And then there's been like a leftist call for boycotting Tesla, right?
Yep.
And then Trump, in response to that, bought a Tesla and then did like an event with Elon where he's like, selling the car to the American people about how great it is and how Elon's a patriot, which I don't blame Trump for. I mean, I actually appreciate the loyalty to some degree because I think the left is ridiculous about this, right?
For sure.
They've so fetishized Elon and the position of the robber baron that they are radicalizing their base to do violent things here.
Well, that's no major shift for the left. Obviously, we saw that during BLM and all the Antifa stuff. Sort of their MO for mobilizing the people in service of their ends.
Well, it's such an obvious play, too, because they've been such on the shtick of, we got to separate these two people and make them hate each other. Well, that didn't work. So now what do? We're going to drive down Elon's wealth and attack his sources of income.
Yeah. Which is, again, another MO. They did that with X right after he bought it. They did it with Facebook, right, with Meta. Zuckerberg lost billions of dollars over that ad boycott. So, yeah, I mean, it seems like standard leftist tactics at this point.
At least one of my theories, too, is that the tax cuts are actually just in the wrong order of operations. Like, why wouldn't you defer the tariff war until after the tax cuts? Why wouldn't you cut income tax first, get the economic benefit of that, and then do the tariff stuff?
Good question.
Right. And I think the answer to that is that they wanted to do the tariffs early so they could start paying the cost so that things could recover by the midterms.
Sure.
Right.
Well, and also they're a huge bargaining chip with all these countries. I mean, we saw Trudeau, or we saw, Canada roll back their electricity pull back. They were gonna deprive the Great Lakes states of electricity from Canada if Trump didn't undo his tariffs. But instead, Trump said, "Well, I'm going to tariff aluminum and steel even more." And so this is really just it's a tit for tat situation. You wonder, does it spiral out of control? Is this sort of an escalatory spiral in the trade sense, or is the U.S. just better positioned to weather some of these things? Does Trump have more cards, to be able to play here to bring some of these countries in on the other objectives that he has that are secondary to the tariffs themselves?
Right. And like I brought up last time we discussed tariffs, the stock market is a betting game on the anticipation of less retail sales. So therefore Walmart goes down. Does that make sense?
Yep.
What that assumes is an inelastic demand. Therefore, an elastic demand for Chinese goods, right?
So explain what that is for the
meaning there aren't alternatives to selling to America, and if there aren't alternatives to selling to America, then they're probably going to eat some of the cost and then pass some of the cost on. It's going to be a two-way street. But if there's a lot of other options, then they're just going to raise prices enormously in America and then divert resources to Brazil or to India or wherever they can sell to.
So which is the actual case?
Well, I don't know, but just keeping in mind, we haven't actually discovered the actual retail effects of these. Now, if you look at last time there was retail effects, but largely those kind of dissipated over time. Keep in mind, Biden didn't really repeal Trump's tariffs that much. I mean, hardly at all.
Yeah.
We live in the old tariff regime of Trump to this day. So to what degrees these are directly passed on consumers or just embedded in the price, and that there is there's a very elastic situation. It's really an open question to what degree these additional tariffs won't be borne some by China. Now, when asked, and I'm not going to actually play the video, but the White House press secretary basically says, no, tariffs are paid for by the origin countries. They're not paid for by American consumers. Importers don't pay the tariffs, in other words. The countries of origin do, which is uneconomic thinking up into the degree that you're calculating elasticity as it's always a very elastic demand curve.
Yeah, gotcha.
Or a supply curve.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's that. And then speaking of Canada and that whole thing, the entire trade war thing with Canada is also, I think, mistimed, right? If he had done tax cuts first and then tariffs second, Canada might have actually got a conservative revolution, but unfortunately not. So what happened this week was Trudeau is out. So, the sons of Castro only control one country now.
At least in front of the curtain. He could pull an Obama and just be back there, pulling the strings.
I was thinking more of a Putin.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah.
Putin in the early 2000s. But yeah, exactly. So the new guy's in, his name's Mark Carney. It's a tragedy we're not doing this without Kyle here. Maybe we should defer till later, but he'll likely call for an election within a few weeks. The new guy is a former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. So he's literally a globalist.
Real outsider.
Yeah, right. And of course, he's with the liberals, but it does appear that liberal support has recovered a lot. Like we covered a little while ago, how devastating the polls looked for Canada with the Conservative Party, and we had like the new potential Canadian prime minister from the Conservatives all over the internet, and tremendously awesome polling. That might have just flipped, in part because of the 51st state stuff and all that stuff. So we'll dig into it. So Breaking Point's had this graph. It was really great. I couldn't actually find this produced anywhere else. I don't know if they made it themselves, but it's definitely worth looking at.
C4B that shows the polling and the way that Trump's tariff war has just like completely rescued the liberals from what was previously certain defeat. And you can see the red line there, like they were in the toilet. I mean, we covered this. When Trudeau resigned, you can see the line there. It was at an absolute low. But the combination, I'm sure having a new leader helps, but really it's the Trump economic warfare that has.
Yeah, so I mean, okay, so just looking at this graph, just one more second. So keep in mind that Canada reverses their colors because they're weird. Okay, all right. So the red is the liberals, the blue is the conservatives, and we're going here from January 1st and just how devastatingly bad it was at till Trump gets in office to the tariff fight.
Wow.
Yeah.
And for those colorblind amongst us, the top line is the blue, the bottom line is the red.
Oh, yeah.
Just to
I got it right, didn't I?
You did.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So now if you look at the
Just wanna be
margin,
accessible.
Yeah, if you look at the margin difference, it's tied functionally. It's very close. I mean, liberals at 107 to 172, the conservatives at 125 to 193.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I'm not saying that that Trump's responsible for this, but what would you expect with a rally around the flag sort of phenomena that would happen when you're like saying this? And I mean, Trudeau in exiting literally said that, no, Trump is trying to annex us. He's trying to tariff us, make us economically weak so he can annex us. And when you look at the largest country in the world that starts all these wars all over the world, that does all this soft power projection all over the world and does everything America does, to a foreign ear, I could understand why that conspiracy theory-like thinking would be very compelling.
Well, especially when matched with Trump's rhetoric around it, even if it is joking, it's really poorly timed joking.
Yeah,
for sure. And
right.
I could absolutely see why, proud Canadians would be like, "Oh hell no, we're not going to do that."
Well, why isn't it an L for Trump? Well, because wouldn't it be better to have a conservative Canada to the north that is also interested in the same things we're interested in America? That we spend billions of dollars overthrowing other countries' governments to put something in that's relatable to us, and all you had to do is just not do anything for 6 months, and or do tax cuts first, and then put those in everywhere else but Canada. Just wait on Canada for a little bit, and you probably could have got a very compatible administration to right on your border, right north of you, that's very much interested in border control and the things that you're interested in.
Yeah.
You want to force them to do all this border restriction stuff. Awesome, great. But wouldn't it be better if they were doing it voluntarily rather than at the end of a stick?
For sure.
Honey and sticks.
Yeah.
Do some honey. You got the honey play here. I mean, Mexico, we have way more reason to have problems on the border with Mexico in the sense of historically speaking, right? And we got this lady, this climate scientist in Mexico who is not at all at the same ideological stripe as Donald Trump or anything like that. I mean, focus on them first and do that first and then move that. I don't know. I mean, like I'm not Canadian, but I would much prefer a better government for Canada. So why not prioritize that? For
sure. I mean, I think you're exactly right. This represents a real strategic misstep by the Trump administration, I think. Mm-hmm. And maybe an unintended consequence that they didn't foresee. I'm not sure we could have foreseen it or anybody could have, but I suppose it does make sense in retrospect. Obviously, hindsight is 20/20. Mm-hmm. That you would strengthen the incumbent government by putting pressure on a country at this time. But I mean, I don't know. Is there a possibility that this trend reverses itself once things kind of settle down? Yeah.
The question is, will it in time for the election, and will the Canadian electorate respond to it? Or are they just going to be pissed until their election cycle's over about the 51st state stuff.
True.
Right.
But why would voting against Pierre Poilievre, the presumed, prime minister elect for the Conservative Party, if they, retain power, why would voting against him mean a vote for Trump?
Yeah, because this is an interesting thing, and I wish Kyle was here to answer that. But
Or a vote against Trump, rather.
yeah,
Sorry.
because we are both in English for the most part, barring French Canada, because we share a very similar background with Britain and things like that, because we're neighbors and American media dominates so heavily, because America is the global hegemon, we share a lot of the same political assumptions, right? So Pierre, even if he's out there saying, we're never going to be the 51st state, and he's out there saying, Donald Trump's got some good ideas and he's got some bad ideas, and this whole trade war is bullshit. It's still not as compelling to the electorate as we will stand and fight Trump. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
He has to hedge because he's part of the same conservative movement globally. So it makes him weaker. And it's just in the popular imagination, I assume they're associated because they're both conservative to the degree that Trump's conservative in any real way, know? Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah.
No, that makes more sense. Pierre Poilievre represents sort of an analog of Trump, who might be presumed to be more cooperative or to become a lapdog, just another American conservative governor, might say.
Right.
As opposed to the left in Canada, who would be innately opposed to Trump just by virtue of him being Trump.
Right.
Yeah.
So Canada both sees themselves as like part of the Anglosphere, but also independent in its own thing. And this current dynamic just doesn't feed a conservative victory, probably at the end of the day. So the other one, and the biggest L, in my opinion, is this story of deporting basically Israel's critics. Right? So background, just to remind everybody, Trump issues this executive order on anti-Semitism. He threatens colleges. He revokes $400 million from Columbia University over its anti-Semitism allegations. What happened this week was ICE has detained a green card holder for protesting Israel. The guy's name is Mahmoud Khalil. Did I say that right? Mahmoud?
I think so.
Khalil?
Sounds good to me.
And this guy, he's a doctorate student, just got his master's degree in at Columbia. He's got a wife, an American wife, who is 8 months pregnant. So, and just to note too, this story will continue because there was an injunction put on real recently to stop this from happening, because it is on very dubious grounds. So the reason why I think this is the biggest L is because I think it undercuts one of the strongest arguments for MAGA, which was, we are not the censors.
Right.
They're the censors. And just from the case, I think the meme of it is, well, it's a deportation, therefore good. Right? Deportation of Muslim guy, therefore good. Deportation of anti-Semite, therefore good. But that's not well. And then there's the question of, you're fighting all these legal battles, and you're going to make another one, right? Because this will be a legal battle on First Amendment grounds. So you'll be the one with the First Amendment fight before courts, and then maybe even up to the Supreme Court, because they have a basis and they have an argument, but it's weak, and I think they lose at the end of the day.
And I mean, if you were going to try to make this a media story, to say, oh, it's a deportation, therefore good, picking a green card holder who has a master's degree and a wife and a kid on the way is like not the guy to pick here, right? Like, just thinking from a strategic standpoint, if this was a good idea, which I completely disagree with as well on First Amendment grounds, it's just a strategic misstep on their part.
Or find someone who committed a crime.
Yeah.
Like I don't care if he's got a bachelor's degree in quantum physics. If he blockaded someone into a room,
Yep.
That or is on video physically threatening somebody, then you have a basis. But unfortunately, the evidence there is really weak for this guy.
For sure.
So here's a little bit from the Free Press. Not exactly neutral on this topic. The argument is that Khalil is a threat to the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States.
How?
The allegation here is not that he was breaking the law, said the official.
Oh, God.
Okay, so what's the basis of that? Oh wait, and I got one more of their supposed justification. So that guy might be a little bit off, but I mean it's pretty funny. That's very telling, right? He broke no laws, but he's a threat to our foreign policy. Let's see here. So this is a tweet from the Department of Homeland Security. It says, on March 9th, 2025, in support of President Trump's executive orders prohibiting anti-Semitism and in coordination with the Department of State, U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement arrested Mahmoud Khalil, a former Columbia University graduate student. Khalil led activities aligned to Hamas, a designated terror organization. ICE and the Department of State are committed to enforcing President Trump's executive orders and protecting U.S. national security. So he led activities aligned to Hamas.
With no credible connection to Hamas.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And no crime.
Yeah. So what they're relying upon is the Immigration and Nationality Act. It's called the INA. So foundational, immigration law going all the way back to 1952. Its public law is 82-414. And all this is found in Title 8. So the apologist justification is an alien is, quote, and this is in Title 8, Section 1227. An alien whose presence or activities in the United States the Secretary of State has a reasonable ground to believe would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences for the United States is deportable.
Okay, so what are those adverse foreign policy consequences?
He talked to people on Columbia campus about why Israel is bad and Palestine is not.
But what are the consequences of that?
Adverse. Syria, and it's serious.
Israel
adverse.
Mad is what the consequences are.
Right. Yeah, right. I think that section is relatively weak for that reason. Potential serious adverse foreign policy consequences, not foreign policy implications, not foreign policy looks bad, consequences, right?
Yeah.
So the better case is this section, which is being passed around, but it's complete misreading. This is 1182. This is under the terrorist activities ones. Is inadmissible. Okay, so this means any alien who has engaged in terrorist activities. One, has he engaged in terrorist activities?
Depends on your definition of terrorism, I guess.
All right, just to spice it up, we're going to jump over to this real quick. This is the terrible terrorist activities that he has conducted. Let's watch this. That we have evidence of so far. The government's provided nothing else.
Going to listen to the university and leave the encampment here? Of course not. The university is the one who should listen to us. They should listen to their student body who are demanding to end their investment in the war that's happening in Palestine. Our demands are clear. Our demands are regarding the investment from the Israeli occupation, the companies that are profiting and contributing to the genocide of our people. Again, the university, once again, they are so stubborn in listening to their students. They're treating this matter as a disciplinary matter. They're not treating this as an anti-war movement that actually gathered thousands of students here. That actually sparked thousands of students across the United States.
How far are you all willing to go here on campus?
We're going to go as far as we need to pressure the university to pressure the university to divest from the occupation. This is up to the group, to the leadership of the group, to decide how far they will go. But now it's clear that the students will remain here. They will stay here until they achieve their demands.
So that's the terrible, horrible terrorist activity. So going back to the code here.
Hold on, I just want to be clear.
Go ahead.
They're having like a sit-in.
Yeah.
This is like the most benign protest you could probably imagine.
Right.
They're not even blocking traffic, as far as I know. Maybe they were. I don't know. But
right. I mean, they could make the case that he was trespassing.
Okay.
Right. I mean, that's illegal. I mean, they should have said he was trespassing, but instead they're trying to make it that he is giving material support to Hamas. And I mean that technically. So yeah, any alien who has under the circumstances indicated an intention to cause death or seriously bodily harm, no. Is a consular officer, no. Is a representative, right? As defined in Clause V. Clause V is here. A representative of a terrorist organization described in Clause 1 and 2. So in ties 1 and 2 is engage in terrorist activities or is a consular. So therefore, this does not apply. And then next is a representative of a terrorist organization? No. Now this is what they're trying to say. a political, social, or other group that endorses or espouses terrorist activity. Now, once again, he also has to be, this is how code works, idiots, is if a representative of.
So he has to be a representative of
one of these
a political,
and do this.
Yep. So you got to read multiple lines.
Yeah, that's how code works. So if the challenge with that is that you have to provide evidence that he's a member of a terrorist organization, has committed terrorist actions, or is determined likely to commit a terrorist act. And what evidence do we have of that? Other than that, he didn't toe the administration's line on Israel versus Palestine, right? And don't get me wrong, you could have your position on Israel versus Palestine, but the First Amendment's pretty goddamn clear.
Yeah.
Congress shall make no law. The Supreme Court has made it absolutely clear. That means that if when it comes to this code versus that, every time that wins. That's what that means.
That being the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to, it isn't saying, and this is another thing I've seen on the internet, which enrages me. It makes me so upset because it's like you have no idea. No idea what the Constitution reads, right? In order to say, well, he's not an American citizen, therefore he doesn't have rights. That's not what the Constitution says. Make no law abridging the freedom of speech. It says nothing about being citizens or not. Like, that's not how it's written. And if you either are serious about the Constitution, you think that's actually our founding government, we're a constitutional republic, or you're not. And you're just this nationalist communitarian thing and saying that we're it doesn't matter what the Constitution says anymore. We have a king, and whatever the king thinks is right is the good thing. And that's not the conservative movement. That's not the Republican Party. That's not anything, right? That's just dogmatism, just trying to post hoc justify this action. And It's disgusting. It's a hell of a shame.
It is. This comes at an interesting time, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but Ian Carroll was just on Joe Rogan, and he got a lot of flack for that, for some particular things he said, invoking, the role of Israel's influence in United States policy and our government. Trump obviously got a lot of contributions from pro-Zionist individuals. So, to what degree is this Trump, the administration, just making good on campaign promises?
Yeah, I think that's 90% of it, right? Yeah, I mean, I think the campus protests, because they were in America and in elite universities, and I'm not Jewish, so I don't understand this, and I'm trying to approach it with as much empathy as I can. Absolutely, I mean, I want to. I'm really trying to keep my ears open to understand that point of view. So I'm trying to grasp that there is a zeitgeist feel that is like, well, maybe they're turning on us again,
Sure.
And that is legitimate feeling.
For sure.
I can understand that. But that's one of those legitimate feelings that confuses being Jewish with being Israeli, with being, against the actions of a government in the Middle East, as opposed to being against Jews in general.
Right.
And that inclination is probably the root play for a lot of folks. Another group of folks, and I would assume that's the bulk of it, right?
Yeah.
For other folks, it's legitimately like, no, we can't allow criticism of the state because we think the state of Israel is really super important, and therefore anything that's in service of that is worthwhile, right? And even if it's just operating on the meme of it, even if this fails in court, the chilling effect of it on other people's speech could be substantial, so therefore go do.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And troubling. And disappointing from the Trump administration.
And I do want to know, there was some other stuff that actually could have put him out of compliance with campus policy. Like, for example, they would disrupt studying and classes and stuff like that, walk in with a drum and a loudspeaker and be dicks. That's not free speech. Locking, and I want to be absolutely clear about this, locking people or blocking entrances and exits is not free speech. Those things are aggression, and they should be punished as trespassing, assault, a violation of campus free speech policy. Absolutely. There's no justification for that whatsoever. That should be a problem. But you got to have evidence. You can't do it just because he's the wrong guy saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And if he's really good at it, that doesn't make him a terrorist. That just makes him a guy you don't like.
Right.
Right. And this isn't new to America, too. We did this in World War I. We did this in World War II. We did this in the Civil War. We jailed journalists and we jailed people who disagreed with the war or protested. This is the worst side of American culture, was when we do this.
Yeah.
The uniquely beautiful thing about America is the First Amendment, and it's the preservation of that should motivate everybody.
Yeah.
To say, okay, I don't agree with him on his position on Israel-Palestine, but I think we should not be persecuting people and sending people overseas and creating this kind of chilling effect just because I disagree with them on that foreign policy question.
Yeah. It's very interesting. And it seems, again, just like kind of stepping on a rake, for the administration. Like, how necessary is this? This is like, this isn't deporting a large group of people. This isn't going to make a substantial, impact to the total number of migrants in the country, for example. And this guy's here legally, so that's a totally different story. Anyway, this is one guy they're making an example of. And clearly it's for the chilling effect. I mean, that seems to be a very reasonable theory. But again, the timing of this is like, why? It's a spark that can and probably will and obviously is inflaming his opposition to a great degree. That's just going to create more and more headwinds. I don't understand the logic behind this, if there is any, and it doesn't seem like there is very much.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the political consequences are going to be. I think it's embarrassing. I think it's obviously it's going to split people, but it's going to split people on Israel versus Palestine, not on free speech versus not free speech.
Right.
And that's the tragedy of it. I wish it was done on free speech versus anti-free speech. I wish people had the integrity to point to that, even when they're on the pro-Israel side.
Well, and when we saw Free Palestine first crop up, that was when we really saw supposed conservatives, supposed free speech absolutists who were all about that when it came to COVID censorship and, deplatforming of conservative voices, totally flip sides and completely change their views and reveal, I think, how disingenuous they were around those arguments.
Right. It's the true woke right to piss off Adam and quote, what's his face?
James
Lindsay.
Yeah.
So, and I know we're running long, so we're going to keep going, guys. Although I could talk about that topic for hours. Next up, we got this goings on in Syria, and I apologize for the crude joke up front. Ethnic cleansing's never funny, but it's like in the insanity of the moment, right? The most predictable frickin' thing happened. The thing that who's been looking at what happened in Israel or in Syria after, what was it, November, I want to say?
Yeah.
Didn't say this. I mean, even Ben Shapiro said this was likely, but Annette Good, which is 1,300 to 7,000 people, we don't really know, have been killed in Syria, who are, for the most part, Christians, Druze, and Alawites. Druze and Alawites, if you don't know, and I had to look this up, so don't feel bad, are Shiite minority groups who don't fit in with the Sunnis because they're Shiites, and don't fit in with other Shiites either. They have their own unique ethnicity and identity, both theologically speaking and in terms of language and culture that goes a long ways back. And the videos are nightmare-inducing. They're terrible. Men forced to crawl on hands and knees for a very long time before being shot in the back of the head, women being killed systematically, children being killed. So a terrible thing is happening. The Syrians, the new government, which is HTS, try to pronounce it, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS.
And these are the former Al-Qaeda members who have grown up. Right?
Yeah, I mean, to which degree the leader is that, right? To which degree the individuals that comprise it are probably a mixture of people who've never done terrorism before, and this is their first run at the whole thing. And to a degree, the veterans are part of other groups. Al-Jabani, was Jilani.
Al-Jilani,
who runs it. I think he changed his name.
I think you're right.
I'm probably underprepared on that. But he was former Al-Qaeda. He was, like the rest of ISIS, was at one point dropping bombs, or not dropping bombs, but setting up improvised explosive devices in Iraq. He was originally from Syria, spent some time in the Arabian Peninsula, went to Iraq to fight the Americans. He actually meets up with a bunch of guys in a prison set up by America, and then he's like, hey, what if we, Americans are leaving soon, we should go set up our own country in Syria. So he joins ISIS, and he jumps out of ISIS, and he goes to al-Nusra. Al-Nusra is just Al-Qaeda's version of Syria. And keep in mind this, and this is something that we should never, ever, ever forget. This WikiLeaks cable. Hillary Clinton email. Israeli intelligence says collapse of Syria will spark a Sunni Shiite war that will benefit Israel. And we should never forget that it was also in the same set of cables where a diplomatic email to Hillary Clinton says Al-Qaeda's on our side in Iraq and Syria and fighting Assad. So, this dynamic looks very predictable.
Sure does.
And now what we've got is these, 7,000 potentially people of minorities being killed. And it was HTS who claims that they are working to neutralize Alawite militias, like competitive militias. Think of them as, and these minority groups were in general very pro-Assad. The reason why is because the Assad regime has been relatively tolerant of the very diverse, long-term diverse situation in Syria, because it's effectively should be like 7 different countries, but Sykes-Picot puts it all into one thing, calls it Syria, right?
Yeah.
So the defense minister issued an order on Saturday admonishing the troops under his command and told them not to film any of their activities in the northwest anymore.
Oh, don't film them.
Yeah.
Don't
which is
not do it.
Which is
just don't fucking film it.
I mean, I don't trust the former Al-Qaeda guy to tell me the truth. So like when they say this is Assad forces, I'm like, I don't believe you.
Women and children, for sure. Dude.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, a lot of the videos are of men, but we don't know what's going on. So we're just going by what we're seeing. We're going by reports like this. We're going by there's other reports, but this is a light media situation right now, right? Because this has been in a 7-sided war since 2014, right? So to what degree does it have to do with the Trump win or loss column that we've been kind of discussing? Before he was president, he had great comments on this that were very much in line with what we've been talking about. But once he became president, he bombed Assad's forces twice, including one time where it was like a chemical factory was what they claimed. But then it's like, but now you just released the chemicals to everywhere around it.
Sounds like chemical weapons to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's crazy, dude. It's always hard to talk about this stuff.
It is, but it's important because, is this getting a lot of coverage?
Not from the mainstream press. I haven't seen any. And I checked. I looked on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, CBS, and I saw scarcely anything online. I'm not a cable news subscriber, so. But the internet is talking about it, which is nice. A lot of it is done, which I think unfortunately, but it is good sales, is making the point that a lot of these people are Christians who are being killed. So saying, hey, Christians, you should wake up. Our foreign policy has resulted in this situation, which is not trivial. But and this is a great one. You remember this picture? Look at the USAID stuff.
Oh, yes.
Right? And
we've got, for those audio-only listeners, we've got some Islamic terrorist-looking gentlemen, if I can call them that, in a USAID tent with USAID printing all over it.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is an old picture, but the quote on here is, he's wearing American camouflage, he's ISIS commander, USAID printed on all the tent, and then your tax dollars at work funding the genocide of Christians and Alawites in post-Assad Syria, which I think is so true.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Sadly, yes.
And hilarious and just ridiculously predictable. Once again, note that it was as recent as Tulsi Gabbard at her Senate hearing confirmation saying exactly that. Right? Just to remind you guys.
I shed no tears for the fall of the Assad regime, But today we have an Islamist extremist who is now in charge of Syria, as I said, who danced on the streets to celebrate the 9/11 attack, who ruled over Idlib with an Islamist extremist governance, and who has already begun to persecute and kill and arrest religious minorities like Christians in Syria.
I understand.
Why that should be acceptable to anyone is beyond me.
Yeah. So thousands have fled to Russian-controlled occupied air bases in the area. And of course, like we said, Israel now controls hundreds of square miles of this area now. And I can't not remind people of the clean break memo. There's a great map here of the area. Let's see if I can blow it up. Yeah. So Damascus right here, and it's this area south of Mount Hermon all the way through the Golan Heights.
And that is the area that Israel currently controls.
Yeah, Israel's taking up all this space right here.
The
in this
light
stripe.
shaded area.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So the interesting. So remember, the Clean Breaks memo is a memo written by two Israelis about how they're going to change the dynamic with the peace accords that happened after in the 1990s and 2000s. Well, sorry, in the 1990s, and when I said 2000s just then, where they said, well, we got to change the dynamic, and what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that we don't have all this pressure that forces us into the operating table. So what we're going to do is we're going to overthrow these countries. We're going to America to do it. And one of those countries on that list was Syria. In fact, it's one of the last two on the list that haven't been overthrown, Syria and Iran. Interestingly, there was a lot of war drums earlier this week about Donald Trump and Iran and outrage about him floating the idea of a new nuclear deal with Iran coming from certain sectors like Mark Levin.
A nuclear deal meaning some sort of drawdown?
Basically saying, well, yeah, drawdown of tensions.
Yep.
And saying that we're going to cut a deal so that they will never develop a nuclear weapon.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And outrage from the hawkish right
Yes.
on that.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yep.
Well, that's a partial W, I would say.
Yeah, if he does it.
If he can do it.
Yeah, if he can do it. I mean, I'm absolutely full endorsement. I mean, the tragedy is we would already have a nuclear deal, but he pulled us out of it.
Right.
And one of the things that's bothered me is no one has ever been able to articulate to me why. Right? They would say, "Oh, well, we gave him money." It was their money. We froze their accounts. Back when the overthrow of the Shah happened. Mm-hmm. Right? And so those have been sitting in a bank account all this time, and we said, okay, you can have your money back as part of their side of the bargain, and then they would submit to inspections and all this stuff. I don't know how much firmer a deal we could have had. No one's been able to articulate to me exactly why why it was insufficient in the first place. He would just say it was a very bad deal. It was terrible, and I made it better, or I got out of it because it was bad for America, and I just never understood what the argument was there.
Yeah.
I mean, you may get that deal about NAFTA. Okay, fine. Maybe there's some deal there, right? That's a very complex. This is freaking simple, right? It's like, are we doing a thing to make sure they don't develop nukes? Yes. Are they getting something out? Yes. What's the problem?
Yeah, seems like a pretty fair deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have other cards to play too. If you wanted to improve on that deal, cut a new deal that says, okay, we want a little bit more inspections. That's more frequent or whatever, or deeper or whatever, or more people on the ground more consistently, whatever. And we'll normalize trade relations with you.
Sounds great.
Why not? You know,
sounds awesome.
So I don't know.
More peace in the world, less war.
Yeah. Anyways, if you want a deeper dive and many more stories that couldn't be covered this week, as there are other ones, I actually had to cut out quite a few. Join the Discord.
Yes.
And we're getting new people in the Discord right now.
Yes, we
like
are.
a couple people a day. I mean, it's been awesome. So join in. It's a great time. We're always in there talking shit, having a great time. Please do join it.
Absolutely. David, thank you for your time this evening.
Yeah,
it's been great to see you. I know I've been a AWOL for a little bit. Glad to be back in this chair with you, and we're glad to have you watching. Thank you guys so much. This has been Human Reaction, and we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you want to become a member and support the show financially, check out humanreactionpod.com.